Hi there. So tonight I am joined by Damian Bloomfield from Manchester. Hi, Damian.
Hi, Billy. Great to be here.
It's nice to be able to chat with you. As I say, I'm doing these conversations about race and just providing a platform to listen to the experiences of Black people in the UK over the last however many years. And so thank you for participating here with me. So tell me a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, where you live now.
Okay, thanks, Billy. I work in the IT industry. I'm married with two children. I won't give away my exact age, but I was born in the early 70s. So that gives you an idea of my generation. Yeah.
And you're a bit of a music fanatic.
Yeah, I play the bass guitar. I'm a music historian, so I'm your guy who would read all the album crates and memorize them, and across multiple genres. And yeah, I kind of do that as well as my IT work.
Right. So tell me a bit about your background, Damian.
Okay, so my parents came here 1960. They met here. So they're part of the Windrush generation. Sadly, they're deceased. They're no longer alive. But I'm one of two children, and my parents got married in the early 60s, and I was born in the early 70s. My brother was born in the late 60s. My mother was a midwife. She came over here to pursue that. She had preliminary studies in the Caribbean and then came here to finish her studies. Yes, so I was kind of, my schooling started early 70s, high school in the early 80s, and college and university, and then corporate life.
So tell me about your experiences growing up in Manchester in those days, Damian. What was it like for you?
Okay, so I was brought up in a inner city area in Manchester, Moss Side. And predominantly, the schools were predominantly multicultural, primary school and high school, and you know, the teachers were very aware of, you know, they would stamp out anything that was you know, said incorrectly, and I was quite aware of apartheid in primary school and quite aware of multiculturalism. Yeah. I wrote a few plays myself when I was at some multicultural evenings and that kind of thing. In my church background, it was very predominantly Jamaican Pentecostal background. As you know, that my mother was the church we grew up in, which was the Bethel United Church. Apostolic Oneness Pentecostal. My mother's one of the founder members in 1960, so it was a very very close-knit Jamaican community. However, when I look back now, certain things in the inner city were only now growing up, and even like moving into suburbia, I could see certain things were expected of people in the inner city. So for instance, I've told the story on another podcast of how police visited my primary school and took fingerprints of my class, myself included, right? And some parents kicked off and said, "You've got no right to do that." But that was after the fact. So they took our fingerprints and kind of made us feel like, oh, we're going to have a fun activity today. We're going to take fingerprints. And you know, even coming into where I live now, my car insurance went down by £200, and I thought to myself, wow, because certain things, being in the Moss Side area, certain things were expected. It's like when that scripture says, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" It was almost like, "Can anything good come out of Moss Side?" You know, so there was an expectancy from Black youth not to be successful, to be prone to violence and drugs and that kind of thing. So my parents kept me off the street, but the microaggressions that I faced, even in working life, I was still living in Moss Side while I was in working life, and people, you know, the jokes about the drugs and that kind, you know, and people have thought, oh, the way I speak so well, they wouldn't have expected me to be from those areas. So yeah, we were expected to succeed. So it was kind of an overarching expectation that, you know, us as Black people, we weren't expected to succeed.
So obviously, the death of George Floyd has raised the issue again. I mean, I know that you've been active in this area of equality for a long time now.
Yes.
Tell me a bit about what that has brought up for you, Damian.
Okay. George Floyd has been the tip of a proverbial iceberg. And what I found is there's a certain psychology behind a lot of the British public, a lot of the white British public. And I've kind of spoken to that in a lot of my posts. So I can see the defensiveness, which has tried to push the narrative to a United States narrative, and it's not the United States at all. I mean, if we want to go back to colonialism, Britain was the progenitor, which was, Britain loves to pride itself on being the mother of countries. Well, it has to be the mother of countries when it's good and when it's bad. So, in this case, we've had a long history of racism in this country, albeit more, some people would say more subtle or more covert. So it really, what kind of blew me away was why now? I think George Floyd was the tip of the iceberg, and through COVID, and obviously there've been racist kind of overtones around COVID. So George Floyd just really, it was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, and we really started to discuss it in Britain. Having said that, there's a few things that have been going on over the last few years. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, she was coming up against it, and it's kind of, that was, I've said to people this week, she must feel a sense of vindication to some extent, because she was trying to talk about it, but you can see the pushback before. It's like, we were meant to feel like we're oversensitive, it's all in our heads, we're just making a big deal out of nothing, it's let's forget the past, let's move on, etc., etc. But I think now people like yourself are really listening and realizing it's not in our heads. It's not, it's not, we're not saying all white people are bad. Yeah. We're not saying, we hate white people and we're unforgiving and we're bitter. We're just saying that, we deserve to be treated equally in this country and other countries that we have contributed to. Let me just touch on the subject, the statement, Black Lives Matter, for a second. Black lives have traditionally mattered when it's, when we're serving the country. So when we're in the armed forces, when we're Daley Thompsons, when we're the Tessa Sandersons and the Mo Farahs and the Frank Brunos and the Lenny Henrys. So when we're entertaining and when we're, bringing fame to the country. But in the areas of equality, in the areas of, even in the boardroom, I'm working for a company, and the company has a female CEO. And that is groundbreaking in terms of diversity, but that's a gender diversity ceiling. And that gender diversity ceiling has been broken before the race diversity ceiling, which has been going on much longer. So, I'm yet to see Black female CEOs at that level. I'm yet to see Black CEOs at that executive committee level, or that, I've seen Black PAs of white CEOs, but, these are the kind of things that it's almost like we can talk about it now. Albeit, and we terminology is a big thing. I was watching something today about BAME, and BAME works for statistics, but let's be clear, what we're talking about in this specific context is the treatment of Black people as it relates to white people, as it relates to systemic racism being about power, being about structures. So, for instance, the definition of racism in this context is talking about power and structures. So you can have, because this is another defense tactic, people say it works both ways. Well, not necessarily. I can be prejudiced towards you. That doesn't make it right at all, okay? But if you're into systematic structure of power, racism is equal to racial prejudice and power. You put them both together, that's racism. So it's not about it working both ways. It's about equality, and in terms of how we are treated and our place at the table. And that will filter into obviously how we're all treated, how we're treated in terms of our class, in terms of our sex, and such like.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that. You got 2 kids, Damian, 12,
Yes.
3. How is it raising them in today's culture? Have things changed since you were a young person?
Well, it's different struggles.
Right.
Being in an inner city environment has brought about, thank God that I got out of there, because, excuse me, when you've gone to a place where your council tax is 3 times as high and your mortgage, etc., there's a lot of money that's gone into education. There are a lot of pluses. There are a lot of kids. My son was somebody who wanted to learn, and now he's in an environment where there are other kids like that. Having said that, being one of the few Black children, he has to face microaggressions on his level. He has to face people who feel that racism is, that we're in a post-racial society, or he has to query about history when history is taught from a Eurocentric perspective. So he has to be, aware of that, where the blind spots of some of the white teachers, where they'll see him who is as dark as me, and then they'll see another Black child which is a bit lighter, and they'll just consider, well, the Black are all the same. That's this kind of laziness to actually appreciate the diversity. And on the other end of the spectrum, my daughter, who's 3 years old, taking her to nursery, she's the only Black child in the nursery, so they have to understand, well, her hair is different. The sand is going to be different in her hair. It's not going to, it's going to be an issue. The plaits, the book. She needs the dolls. She needs the books that she can see herself in. My wife said the other day, she was concerned that some of the kids were even referring to her as a boy, because they'd never seen, their idea of a girl is someone with long blonde hair, what they consider to be a princess. So I've even had to, go, the whole, to shatter that whole paradigm. So when my daughter gets out of the bath, her hair's, like this. It's not going to be flowing down to her back. She needs to realize that beauty and being pretty is not Eurocentric. So, it's got to start all the way from the womb, basically.
Wow.
So.
Wow. So listen, Ed, what would you want to say to me, Damian, as a white church leader? How do we respond appropriately to this current context, but thinking longer term as well?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, what I've said a lot is that it's a marathon and not a sprint, clearly. Yeah. And people like yourself, I personally appreciate that. I don't use the term, I don't I appreciate it, because, I always use the example of when you've got a woman that works in an office and she hasn't been sexually harassed all week, she doesn't go up to the men and thank them, because that's a basic human right. So, I'm not raining down praises on individuals. I'm appreciating, which is because it's long overdue. I feel that the church has a voice. Again, in this social construct, white leaders, a lot of the time, white church leaders have voices that have access to governmental structures, that have access to legislators, that have, and I think it's people like yourself listening to not only leaders, but listening to lay members like myself, and taking that on board. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I approached a leader here in Manchester and said, I've written a proposal which will marry the whole situation between the church and society, because we could go back as far as Methodism. Church has always been, on the cusp of making changes. So I think as you listen to our concerns, we need to see how that translates into legislation, how that translates, I touched on my son and my daughter, so how that translates into education on the local and national level. You can see the kind of microcosms in the church, because you have children's workers in the church, you have youth workers in the church. So if us as a Black congregants are in a white middle-class leadership church, and that youth worker or that children's worker doesn't get the diversity thing, then we're in a bit of a pickle. So it's our influence between me and you and I. We're in the kind of we're in that church space. So there's things that we can do in terms of just how we interact day to day, and make sure that in your pastoring you're realizing that a large members of the congregation are going out 35 hours a week and going into that space where they're already maybe the minority in corporate world, they're already not being understood. So we need to fix that in the church and pastor them as such. Having said that, that will also translate into having Black leadership. While I'm on that subject, it's important. I've also been educating my white allies that there are Black people and there are Black people, put it that way. So not all Black people are going to have the same mindset. So, some Black people came over here, they didn't come over here during Windrush. You've got that. Some of them in the countries that they were from, some of them were from Black majority countries. So they faced xenophobia. So they wouldn't, to them, the enemy might not be the white man. The enemy might be their fellow Black man. Now, also within that, some Black people have come from a country where, being the majority, they have got where they've got via meritocracy. So they've done a lot of exams and they've come here and they've considered, well, you're just lazy. That's why you're not where you are. It's an imaginary proverbial glass ceiling. And, that's not necessarily the case. Some Black people don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to be seen to be upsetting their white counterparts. They want to, not fall out of good graces with their white colleagues. So they will kind of, perpetuate the white guilt and say, oh, it's all in the past, get over it. When you talk about it, you're actually perpetuating division and that kind of thing. So, what I say to that is that, speaking up is, if speaking up is hate, okay, love isn't silence. So, the fact that I love I love people of all races, but we have, the Bible says, speak the truth in love. So this era of people speaking up and speaking boldly is not hate driven, and it's not revenge driven at all. We're not looking for revenge. That's the thing. We're looking for equality, and it's not from an unforgiving spirit at all, or a bitter spirit. It's just from a justice. And as long as we protest peacefully, as long as we do things in an educated and a informed way to bring about solutions, and as we're doing now, we're not brawling, we're having a conversation. So that's the way forward, most definitely.
Damian, thank you. We could talk for hours here, but I so appreciate you taking the time just to share your heart and your thoughts, and let's believe that we'll make a difference.
Of course, Billy. Thank you for your time. Of course.
God bless you.